Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning into The Scoop. I'm your host, Frank Chaparro, here at The Block, and we are excited to dive deep into something that's one of the more pressing issues in the blockchain space. It's a thing that I've talked about on the show before, right? There are three types of lies, damn lies, and market data, or just data in general, right? And today we're going to be exploring, as the various blockchain ecosystems grow, how do we manage and sift through and navigate the complexities of consuming vast amounts of data? And joining us to unpack these challenges and the solutions that seem to be cropping up all over the place are representatives from SonarX and AWS. And together we'll explore how the leading cloud provider is stepping in to help address the data demands of what is appearing to be a multi-chain future. We can go around the horn because we have a few of us today. Patrick Kim, thanks for taking the time.
Right, thanks for having us on. Patrick Kim, I'm CEO and founder of SonarX. We were formerly Sonarverse, so I know you were calling us
SonarX, that's right.
Yeah, SonarX, we just rebranded. I've traditionally more former TradFi, and then we got into this vision of building out a data platform in the lights of where the institutional market is today and enterprise. We'll get all into that, but thanks for having us on.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much for having us. I'm Jesse Bornstein. I run business development here at SonarX with Patrick. My background's from TradFi as well. I've been around blockchain since about 2016, working on some interesting stuff before the terms RWAs and real world assets and tokenization, I think, were even a thing. We were trying to figure out how do we get assets on chain. So always been very attracted to the space and really excited to be here today talking with you, Frank.
Thank you so much. And last but not least.
How's it going, everybody? I'm Everton Fraga. I'm a senior Web3 specialist at AWS. I'm in crypto since 2016 as well, professionally, right? I used to work at the Ethereum Foundation as a software engineer. So we built kind of the first concept Web3 browser, right, that would connect the web and the blockchain in a single, software. And those were all kind of thrilling times. And here at AWS, I work with amazing customers and partners like this one, SonarX, delivering scalable solutions for our customers.
Amazing. It was SonarX in my notes, but then I kind of panicked and thought that was a mistake because I've known you guys since the beginning. Patrick, let's start with the problem, right? Which is the deluge of data. And we've talked about this on a number of phone calls in the past about how blockchain data is really just, can we say, growing exponentially, it seems. Can you walk us through the current state of blockchain data management and why it's becoming increasingly complicated? Obviously, there's a lot of nuances between each chain. What's the problem? Walk us through it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right on about the exponential problem about blockchain data. And this is a big data problem. We call it big data, meaning the scale of data when you look at it from an enterprise institution. There's traditional warehouses that handle amount of data, and then there's a big data problem. And 3 years ago, when we had started this direction and mission to handle the data problem, it was even where maybe like 50 terabytes of data was a lot of data. Today, we're managing half a petabyte of data. So when we talk about scale, that's 500 terabytes of data. So to put that into kind of scope or lens is like even a large financial institution, it would be hard to say that they'd even manage more than 5 terabytes of data. And so you're talking vast amounts of data. And there's two parts of that actually leads to that issue. One is the fact that every blockchain out there, the ones that have been around for a long time, and there's new ones popping up, they all produce massive amount of data, and they're all differ based on the nuance of the chain, but they exponentially grow. So meaning they double in size almost every year. And it's part of a byproduct of how the blockchains are created. And then the second part is that there's just new innovations. So there's new chains and so forth. And then part of that innovation also includes there's more protocols, there's more activity going on the chains. And although there's ups and downs on where the market is around the usage and the adoption of blockchain, generally speaking, we're still seeing that exponential growth. So it certainly is a big data problem. And when we had started, again, going back 3 years ago, it was a much smaller problem, like you can imagine. And today it's become and blossomed into a very big challenge in which luckily we were able to get in front of that and think about the scaling solutions because when you're talking about the gravity of multi-terabytes and hundreds of terabytes of data, it's a very costly endeavor. And so for enterprises, applications, institutions, for them to be able to take the data and draw analytics and information, abstract that data, it's going to be very costly. So how do you get to a point where consumers can scale and use that data effectively and understand the nuances of each and every chain and develop the use cases that the enterprises need today?
Yeah. So bottom line is a lot of data to sift through. Maybe Jesse, you can help us maybe contextualize where we all sit in the stack of data, as it were. I guess we'll start with me. I'm a consumer of it, right? I'm looking at the charts, or I'm I'm on the block data dashboard, seeing a wide range of metrics from transactions on Solana to open interest on CME Bitcoin futures markets. So I'm the consumer. Everton, I guess you're storing it somewhere in some data center out there. You don't need to tell us where it is. And then Jesse and Patrick, you guys are maybe helping connect the dots between the two.
Yeah. So maybe if I could, so I think what we're seeing is like convergence of let's call it three main things, right? So on one hand, you have a lot of infrastructure that's been built, which has made a lot of like many more blockchains easily have the ability to come to market. So now you have all this infrastructure. Now you have many more blockchains. And at the same time, you have most things that are built on chain at this point in time are built to be multi-chain. As you started off the podcast with, this world, we're in a multi-chain world. We totally agree. And almost every product that gets built on chain happens to be that case. So now that means for almost any use case that you're involved in, whether it's trading, whether it's accounting, whether it's stable coins and payments, like whatever you're going to use blockchain for, I think we'd all agree that we need the data, right? And I think when we think about blockchains, we've been told for the last 10 years that there are these kind of transparent ledgers, right? Which then leads you to believe, okay, that's great because I can just have the data. I know exactly what happened at all times, every time. And while technically that's true, when it comes to actually consuming blockchain data, and you can talk to anyone who deals with nodes, which is how you get the data directly, something called RPC calls, blockchain data is extremely raw and not consumable, not human readable, right? So, and to Patrick's point earlier, each blockchain has its own nuance. So now I need to understand for whatever my use case is, what's happening across 100, probably going to be 1,000 blockchains, right? One, it's in a massive amount of data. Two, there's all this nuance to understanding it. Three, how do I read it? Where do I store it? Like, those are the types of problems that we are really, really focused on. Those are the types of problems we're trying to solve. And really excited, for the signal and the fact that AWS sees it too, and they're coming into the space to help.
So how are you helping?
All right. So it is known and regarded as the lead cloud provider, right? So there are so many innovations that come together to make any image to be loaded on the internet fast, right? So that all comes down to building all the infrastructure, laying out the cables, but then you need to move up the stack, right? So eventually, the use cases of the internet put a lot of pressure on innovation, and folks have been doing that, diligently working on operational excellence, ensuring that data centers can scale, ensuring that the businesses can scale at the speed of the market. And so we've been, expanding in regions. So we just launched the region in Thailand, right? So that kind of joins, kind of a very large wealth of data centers and availability zones, as we call them, to just delivering information and compute services to users, right? So this all comes together, and services like these, as the compute, as we call it so much, called EC2, help us to seamlessly spin up a new instance and have folks using that in a scalable model, right? So then we can deliver innovation all across the world, providing the same infrastructure and services to startups, newborn startups, as the Fortune 500 companies in a pay-as-you-go model, right? So it's something that really helps folks scale and with typically no upfront licensing costs, so you can pay as you go and scale your business.
So I'm an application. I'm looking to build in crypto. In terms of dealing with the data, the way you described it, Patrick and Jesse, was, a lot of it's unstructured and not easily digestible. Can you juxtapose the current landscape from the position of an app developer in blockchain to that of one operating in traditional Web 2 technology? Is it an order of magnitude more complicated? Is it 50% more complicated? Can you contextualize the problem set in that terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the major things as us coming from TradFi, as we got into the blockchain space and we started to dive into the data, is what is on the blockchain? What is on-chain data? And coming from the construct of digital assets as an asset class. So if you take the construct of financial services and how we look at asset classes, how do we form crypto into that digital asset class? Now, it doesn't pair perfectly into that paradigm. Why? Because digital assets is very variable and there's different constructs to how that asset class can be constructed. So not all crypto or tokenized assets are the same. So there needs to be a good understanding and a methodology to understand the differences of those chains. And what makes it, again, very difficult is that each chain is constructed differently in the data. So now our mission for one is how do we standardize the digital asset class from a data perspective? So
what's an example of those differences? Like if you were to look at two different specific chains, what's a tangible difference?
Oh yeah, great question. So a great one, easy one to understand is what we call a native asset to a chain. So if you have Ethereum or ADA for Cardano, right? It's native to the chain and it's the mechanism that operates that entire chain. And we all understand what those assets actually understand and what they mean actually. But when you think of an asset class, think in the DeFi space, like Aave, for example, that is also a digital asset that's on Ethereum and other blockchains, but it's also crypto that can widely be used. And so you put it into whether it's in a larger category DeFi, and then you have the Uniswap that are DEXs. And so and there's a whole list of and that go on.
Yeah, but I think what makes it difficult from a data perspective is that when you look at Aave, for example, on Ethereum and like the data aspect of it, it doesn't necessarily look the same on Cardano, right? Or on some other chain, if to the extent the token lives on multiple chains. And so when you're interpreting the data, it's actually you need a lot of subject matter expertise on each blockchain you're looking at to actually understand what's happening with a given asset.
Yeah. Yeah, and so to that respect, like we try to standardize. Today we support nearly 100 blockchains today, and our mission is to cover the entire landscape. And we standardize them as much as possible so that whatever you're looking at from a digital assets, if you're trying to understand transactions, all the transfer activity that are happening, you're able to look at it regardless of what chain it is across all the entire asset class.
Effectively, when you're digesting the data from one chain from another, the process by which you do that is effectively the same.
That is correct, yeah. And we try to harmonize everything so that the consumer of the data can actually get that insight, regardless if the chain is operating or the data construct is very different. I'm able to look at that as the same type of transaction, the same type of transfer, or the same type of staking activity, for example, across the board.
So how much does this slow people down? I mean, if we think about how the market is moving away from this less standardized mechanism of data consumption, what does that translate into from a cost and time savings perspective?
I can take this one, right? So I've been working with both startups and financial institutions, right? Big financial institution created their center of excellence, right, for blockchain. So imagine a 100-year-old bank wanting to dive into crypto, and they had to create kind of a multi-year strategy, of course, and they needed to train their own people, understand that from scratch, right? And in a world where we have only, let's say, Ethereum, that would be kind of fantastic, right? Because you only need to learn a single tech stack, a single way to extract data. But now we're taking a step back. We have so many innovation coming from different sides that even as a big financial institution that could fund a very large engineering team, maybe the best bet would be, hey, let's take a step back, focus on the business, and delegate portions of that to specialized companies so we can all benefit and grow fast, right? So that's one of the things we observe, and it might take. It's been taking 7 years for those large financial institutions to come with their own crypto services, right? We want to ensure that folks can accelerate that and leverage the market conditions and the user base that is growing, so they can all succeed.
And that problem is effectively, the impediment of thinking through which chain shall I prioritize my activity on is a Herculean task for a large institution. And if you can just take that problem away, if you can just say it doesn't really matter because the efforts that you're going to dedicate to Frank Chain will be just as applicable to Jesse Chain from at least a data consumption perspective if we do this right. And it seems like we're moving away from traditional RPC, and that's going to also ameliorate some of these issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add to that about the consumer experience, and I used this example a lot in the past, and it just happens to be that now we're closely working with AWS, and it's example like before AWS was around, they launched EC2, which we're all using now. The market was much more fragmented. I look at crypto in the state of infrastructure in that current state before AWS came around and developed EC2. So for a company to get involved in blockchain and blockchain data, what do we need? Before I could even extract insights, you need infrastructure. And so before, what would we do? We would literally start up, if you had starting a company, you would start up your own server, or it would be a very fragmented market in which you'd have to go out and find specialized service for, let's say, a Microsoft stack versus a Linux, and whether you're a small retail player versus a very institutional enterprise that needs a much more strong data center. And it was very fragmented. So it's hard to know how to navigate or start something. And now it's non-existent, that problem, because everything's there. It's one-stop shop, very easy and seamless. And now I can extract and build things on top of those servers and compute. And the world has changed. It's kind of that same way today. Like if you wanted to get involved in sort of the EVM world of things, that was more traditionally around. So people had access to that, and there were other providers and so forth. So you can kind of tap into that. As all these new chains come out, there's some have 0 providers, some have very small number of providers, and even those providers, they all vary in type of quality. So what we've tried to do is get in front of that, standardize the approach, and really think from an institutional lens and an enterprise lens of how can they scale. And again, when we started it was very rare to see anyone cover more than, let's say, 10 blockchains. Like having a handful of chains meant they were like really moving, they were really forward in the market. Now we have consumers and our customers that consume more than 50 chains, and the appetite has grown to where they need support for hundreds of chains in the future. And so I think the lessons are from, how where AWS came in and with the EC2 is that nobody wants to do and manage and spend all the resources and time to get that infrastructure started. They want to focus on their core business. And that's what we're trying to help our customers do.
That makes a lot of sense. Jesse, did you want to?
Yeah, I would just say, like, put it even more simply, right? We're kind of gone from a world where, there was just Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so anything we wanted to do in the space, we'd say, okay, let's just spin up our own node, right? And let's get going. And even what we're seeing, this shift in the market, is even the most experienced players within this industry, like businesses that have been operating for 10 years or more, are starting to say, like, why are we doing this ourselves? It's just too complicated and it's taking way too much of our focus away, right? So it's again, very similar to the parallel Patrick was making in the cloud business, right? You went from servers and now AWS came along, and now I have this cloud provider where I can get all these services in one-stop shop. It's a great problem solve.
Well, that leads to the question of Everton. How is AWS stepping in to solve, or at least help tackle some of these data-related challenges? What are you guys bringing to the proverbial table?
All right, so that's a great question, and this can all be answered with the typical Amazon and AWS playbook, right? So customer obsession, right? So that's unavoidable topic, right? So we look at the market, we look at our customers, we try to hear from them, what their needs are, what their immediate, what their medium term, what their long term needs are. And we partner with them and understand exactly how can we accelerate their businesses. And so we have very large banks that are making now multi-year migrations to AWS, from the mainframes and on-premises infrastructure all the way to the cloud. How can we help them in all fronts, right? Especially on the future of money, right? Which all the banks are now talking about, of course. And on the CBDC topic, on all the several major central banks are investigating, or piloting, or already moving to production, and we have all the means to accelerate them and to give support not only to, let's say, the CBDC implementation itself, but all the surrounding infrastructure that comes with it, right? So all the banks that need to now have direct connectivity to such systems and everything that comes after it. So it all comes down to a very simple formula. We look at the customer base, we hear them, and then we build infrastructure. We build not only the laying out the cables and the servers, and the custom chips, but we move up the stack into managed services, data services, and orchestration and all that. So it is a lot of work, and we call that removing the focusing on the undifferentiated lift that companies would have to do. So we take care of that, right? We do our best to ensure that we are fostering innovation.
No small order. One thing, obviously, that I think is going to dominate the narrative going into the new year in 2025 is the further proliferation of stablecoins. How does mainstream adoption of that specific use case and RWA adoption, how does that sort of add to the data challenges that we've already sort of delineated over the past 30 minutes? And are there new data challenges that you can anticipate as a result of that growth?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I think, like we kind of said earlier, like you mentioned stablecoins, you mentioned RWAs, Everton mentioned CBDCs. It remains to be seen how that plays out. But the common theme with all of it is it's multi-chain, right? And so if we start thinking about where this world is going, when we think about stablecoins, we certainly think about payments, right? It seems pretty clear the next generation of payment rails is blockchains via stablecoin, right? It's no coincidence that Stripe just spent $1 billion acquiring Bridge. PayPal's launching its own stablecoin, or has launched its own stablecoin, right? Like Visa, MasterCard, they're very active in this space. So it's the writing is on the wall. And from our perspective, what that means is even more data, right? And even more complexity, because these assets need to live on all of these blockchains, right? And so, what in our mind, what really needs to be in place, and I think a lot of people who aren't deep in the space right now don't necessarily see this, is the organization, the structuring, and the foundation like a state-of-the-art infrastructure to be able to handle, the kind of adoption we're talking about.
I mean, Everton, are we at the precipice of a data engineering nightmare here?
Yeah, so that's a very important topic. That is, no innovation comes right straight from the paper and into production without any massive adoption of any massive movement of, talent pool, new practices for hiring, right? So where do we find these people? What skills are necessary? And then IT managers, they go through a lot of tough decisions, right? So should we build? Should we buy solutions? Should we try to hire folks? Where do I find them, right? And then should I get someone that just is fresh out of Johns Hopkins amazing analytics courses and put to deal with blockchain? Well,
if they don't listen to this show, then you shouldn't hire them. That should be the litmus test, I think.
Yeah, but then how should this whole thing play out, right? So that is a massive undertaking for those folks trying to make decisions around how to build on top of it. And on the data science, from the data science perspective, having data sets that are normalized, that that is already puts any of those companies one big step ahead, right?
You make it sound almost too easy.
Right. So Patrick and Jesse, take it away.
Yeah, so we recently made an announcement at AWS reInvent about exposing 5 new blockchains on the AWS Web3 open data. So originally, the AWS open data had Ethereum and Bitcoin. We've added 5. The 5 blockchains we added were Arbitrum, Aptos, Base, Provenance, and XRP Ledger. All chains very different in its sort of use case and type of data that it produces. But since we talked about RWAs, Provenance is a perfect example. One of the rare public blockchains that are focused on a mission from the RWAs and securitization. And if you think about a HELOC use case, and it's very interesting there, is they originate a vast amount of HELOCs out of the Provenance blockchain. And so having this data out there is one, freely restricted and doesn't have to be on AWS. Any consumer now has access to this data in a very well curated format. And across the board, they can now start looking into and seeing those use cases and develop insights about how are these applications being built and what is the adoption and everything that's happening on these chains. And so we're very excited about this partnership of exposing that. I think we're going to continue to grow that. But I think these are some examples in which in the RWA things are happening.
Yeah, and Frank, to your point earlier, the whole point, right, is to make this easy, right? And we view this as another kind of crucial part of the process of laying the foundation of the infra around this space that's going to spur like tons of innovation and development, right? Because like as I said earlier, like the data is everything and everybody needs to get their hands on the data. And there's a lot of money, as we all know, invested in data mining and data science, right? And there's no shortage of data here, right? And so we're just really excited to be kind of being part of the process.
Yeah, so some comments about this, what is these public blockchain data sets and how it helps, right, the ecosystem, are, we already went through the process that, data is hard to extract, data is hard to do this, it is hard to do that.
Yeah, what can we now see, Everton? What sort of can be manifested from the data that was previously difficult? What can I get a sense of?
Absolutely. So whenever you are interfacing with a blockchain node, it is definitely not the perfect software for you to query things, right? Because it was built, to be honest and to be fair, right? So blockchain node software was built with the critical mission of holding consensus and propagating blocks and transactions in a a fantastic and
Just making
efficient
sure
way.
that transactions work and happen and are reliable.
Absolutely.
Second, if it wasn't so important to sort of get a holistic view of the transactions.
That's on point, right? So that is the job of supporting software, right? So software that would interface with these nodes and then extract the data, and then you can build all sorts of indices, do your own ETL process, standing for extraction, transformation, loading, and then you can query that, right? So that is part of what the software can do and cannot do, and you would put a kind of a lot of pressure on the development teams, core devs, if you were to ask those things from the nodes themselves, right? So you need, right, to have supporting software. Is also good because you separate, you isolate those responsibilities.
Yeah, and just some use cases in terms of what can I actually see, right? So as examples, a lot of the people we work with are actually other data providers in the space, right? So a lot of people are very familiar with Glassnode, right? If you've tracked Glassnode, they've only done a couple of chains, right? And you kind of say like, why is that? The space is exponentially growing, and the problem is the data problem that we've been describing, right? So in terms of like transactions and whose wallet's holding what and who's trading what assets and where the assets going, all things like that we're now opening up for the entire ecosystem, right? And not just Bitcoin and Ethereum. Some other use cases like more institutionally around accounting, like a Big Four accounting firm, they have a big client who is doing staking activity, right? And they need a very like reputable way to be able to understand and essentially audit what that activity is, or crypto tax accounting software, which I'm sure many of your listeners use, right? And they're saying, hey,
You
why?
would hope that they would use, Jesse. You would hope.
No financial or tax advice here.
I think that everyone who listens to the Scoop files their taxes orderly and on time.
No, to each their own. But if you are using one of them, you might be wondering, like, why don't they just cover every chain, right? Like, why is that so hard? This is the crux of the problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gentlemen, how do you sort of think about what is I don't know if due diligence is the right word, but in terms of thinking about supporting new chains, what boxes need to be checked to move into one? I imagine that's also fairly standardized as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So on our side, we want our consumers and our customers of our data to have stability, performance, the efficiency, and one that gets very overlooked is the highest level of data quality. So in order to do that, we need an ample amount of data providers and access to these RPC nodes to be able to pull the data and have a stable environment where we're in real time pulling in data, processing it, and being able to make it very efficient for our consumers to just use the data and they don't have to go through any of that. And it's also quite interesting that every single one of our customers at some point in time had their own stack that was doing this whole process. And one of the things that comes out of this, where people have been the ones that have a lot of experience with that, it's very painstaking to run that operation, but the data quality becomes a very big problem. And why is that? And what people don't understand is that when you extract data from anywhere, where it's like a data engineering problem, is there needs to be a source of truth. And the source of truth here, that our understanding as a data engineer, is the RPC, because it's an actual node. But the problem is, if the node is giving you bad data and it doesn't tell you that's giving bad data, it just gives you bad data, then where do you benchmark that source of truth? And so what we have are lots of customers that, previously coming to us, is they have scattered data or bad data or missing data, and it's hard to detect, it's hard to find. And so, your questions about how do we have inclusion of the chain, they have to follow all those things. They have to fit into um, um, all those metrics that I just mentioned about. And then we have to apply all our data quality framework on top of that process to curate the data and provide a reliable data back to our customers. So I think that's one of the benefits of where people don't have to deal with that. They know that there's an assurance that good quality data is coming through.
That makes sense. How do you imagine new emerging technology shaping or redefining how blockchain data is consumed? How does artificial intelligence, for instance, play a role?
Yeah, so AI is now obviously very, very interesting in the fact that there's a big data problem, like we just mentioned, and the more data you have, the more you can do with data. I don't know how much time we have to go into some examples. There were some really great reInvent examples of using the AWS stack to use AI as agents to produce types of activities that normally would have been done without the agents. And so having all the data, first of all, having it standardized allows any type of vector modeling on top of AI to be able to, like, for example, on LLMs, to effectively understand the data sets, to be able to communicate with it and draw actionable insights from it. There were some very good examples on AWS that I know some of Everton's team was also.
Everton's actually an agent, by the way. That's what we're revealing here today.
Yeah, so we've been experimenting with a lot of those intersections, right? So if you give a wallet to an agent, what can happen, right? So and then those POCs were conducted using Amazon Bedrock, which is our flagship service for supporting AI workloads, and that allows you to plug into a variety of models, right? So from Anthropic to Lemma and Cohere, and even Amazon's own models, right? And the idea is that you can have just a single interface, and again, abstracting away all the work of dealing with new tech, right? So there are a lot of parallels, right, with what SonarX does with blockchain data and with what kind of Amazon Bedrock does without abstracting away all this work, removing the heavy lifting from those companies. And with regards to the use cases, well, analysis is definitely the first one that comes to mind, right? So being able to quickly sift through a wealth of data and draw insights from it is something that we call generative BI, right? So there's a new term coming up, right? And so you can basically plug data to well-established services like Amazon QuickSight, and draw those pieces of tailored insights out of the data.
Mm. Mm. So let's maybe think of some practical advice. If we're talking to developers specifically, what would you maybe or businesses in general? What advice would you give them in navigating the complexities of blockchain data management, aside from obviously becoming a client of the firm?
Yeah, from an application standpoint, the very going start is if you're building an application or you're an enterprise wanting to do something in blockchain is where do I start to build? And there's just so many options today in terms of where and how you can build. And then the second obvious is the multi-chain and the interoperability. So that comes from a lot of lens of understanding, not just based on hype and what you might hear about news, but of a fundamental analysis on really what's going on these chains. And we're seeing a lot more of that scrutiny and analysis on like where do I build, what chains are really suited well for my use case, where should I have the interoperability, where does it have that value, and there's always pros and cons to going in one direction or another. And so data starts as a very integral part of that analysis and research and due diligence and making those decisions. So coming to us, having the stack of being able to see that data across, predominantly the majority of the chains are assets that make up the market cap of crypto today. So again, 100 blockchains, vast majority of all of the top um, several hundred market cap assets are all covered in that context, and people can start looking in.
Yeah, I would add that I would just be very thoughtful about the data stack, right? Like, because this becomes a big problem very, very quickly. And in terms of like because you're talking about so much data, storing the data, querying on it, the compute cost that can result in. I just be thoughtful about it, because we have a lot of customers that come to us and say, like, I tried to go at this. What am I doing wrong? Help.
It's like trying to do your taxes on your own.
Exactly.
Yeah, and a good example of that is actually one is the index provider. So today we're working with FTSE Russell, part of the London Stock Exchange Group, so LSEG, and it's quite interesting what they're doing as well because they've really are leading a lot of charges on the index side. And before they relied on just other providers just to tell them what's going on these chains, and now they're coming in from a very meaningful way of saying, long term, we need to understand this, all the analysis fundamentally around the blockchain industry. And so again, where does it start with data? And so all can't get into a lot of the details, but we've been doing a lot of interesting work with them in terms of understanding that across the network of all blockchains. And so you're going to see more and more of that coming out.
Right. Can I tell a kind of a true story, and then folks from that works on FSIs might identify themselves with that. So think about those big FSIs. They want to dive into the crypto world, and they basically cannot run a blockchain node, right? So they cannot even experiment with that because their AppSec requires that. Hey, why do you have a server with ports open to the world? We don't allow that, right? So it all starts with those these worlds clashing, right? So and then if you want to experiment with blockchain data, you need to acquire it first, right? And you need to rely on third-party RPC providers to do that. That is fair. But then some of the biggest and best service providers are kind of new to this big FSI, right? So how should we go about that? So at AWS, we try to be the trusted intermediary in a very let me put that kind of a bold way, because the FSIs really trust AWS with our services, and then we work with those partners, pretty much like SonarX, and bring them to the AWS marketplace, right? So then those large enterprises, they can really have services that outpace any of the internal initiatives that will be stuck on their AppSec pipelines. So and the idea of open data that as we call the public blockchain data sets is to also provide a fairly easy way for folks to experiment with data. So they can even it is free to use. It is open in the sense that folks can even download the Parquet files and run the analysis on their own machine if they want, right? Or use some of the AWS managed services to read the data and query it. So we're always looking to better ways to facilitate the innovation that they're coming from FSI, and making sure that those two worlds can actually work together, right?
Understood. Patrick, Jesse, Everton, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Very much. Thanks, Frank.